Too. So this panel is going to start to answer or discuss some of those questions around what should we focus on 2018. Kate Dunn, our VP of Corporate Development, will lead the panel. Thanks.
Hi, guys. So thanks a lot to Tim. I was really excited to have the after lunch slot so that you guys would be quiet and not notice if I made a mistake. So Tim really got you amped up, so thanks a lot for that. Can I call my panelists up? So I've got Michael McVeigh, who is our SVP of Performance Management. I've got Clay Kazir, who is our VP of what now? SEO, social, and content, all those things. And then we've got Michael Harrison, who's the managing director of the Winterberry Group. So we are, I'm missing my clicker. Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to talk to you guys a little bit today about emerging technologies and trends. That's a great picture of me, Sarah. Thank you. And I was really interested when I got asked to be on this panel because, as I think a lot of you do know me, an emerging technology guru, I am not. But when we were really conceptualizing it, I was actually really excited to be in front of you because so much of emerging tech is talked about in very high-flown terms, right? And we all know we need to be caring about it, but none of us are sure exactly why. And even consumers are not sure exactly why. So you can see there's multiple trends that we're going to talk about today from a consumer perspective. But what I want to call out here really is that it's really fragmented, right? I think there's a common theme here in that consumers are really interested in things that make their lives easier, make their shopping easier. But in all in all, there's really not a lot of consensus in terms of what consumers are looking for. That said, we need to figure it out, right? As marketers, we have to be able to think about what our next 6, 12, 24 months are going to look like and figure out where we're going to put our money and how we're going to invest to make things better for our consumers, to go after the right audiences, and to make sure that we're answering their needs and meeting their needs. So, with that said, we know we need to adopt. So when we were talking about this internally before we came up here, we were like, all right, well, consumers don't really have consensus, but maybe other marketers do. No, they don't. They absolutely do not. They're actually even more fragmented in how they're spending on emerging tech than consumers are in knowing what they want. So we brought these three guys together today so that we can really start talking to you about what we really think everything that emerging tech means to you guys. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael, the first Michael, and he's going to give us a little talk about an overview of 2018 First Look.
It's a validation of everything that was said this morning. So continuous engagement, really what we're seeing here is the customer experience on the journey. What's interesting, we have 1 billion data points. Oh, sorry. I usually talk so loud, nobody asks it. We're seeing 68% of agencies are being asked to drive these journeys, and that real-time marketing capabilities are necessary. The issue with that is that we're talking about customer journey mapping at the touch point, right? So now we're talking about that I need to build out, as opposed to these broad customer journeys, I need to build out journeys that, and I talk with my hands, so that's even worse, right? Customer journeys get really detailed and become spider charts. And identity management and recognition is really going to drive the space. Because to be able to do a journey across all these touch points, I need to be able to identify those individuals. So, first time I'm seeing some of these, so I apologize. Personalization. To follow up on Tim's, to give a story, my background is data science, so being a focus group of one should never be what I use, but I use focus groups of one all of the time. So I'm a concierge key at American. So American has realized that 13% of their customers drive 50% of the revenue. I'm the 13. And yet, every time I go to the kiosk to print my boarding pass, it asks me if I'd like to sign up for the Admirals Club for the day, while they gave me the Admirals Club for the year. And often when they ask me, it's at an airport that doesn't have an Admirals Club. So while they've recognized who I am, they're not doing much to make my experience better, which is an issue. But on the personalization side, right, one of the issues that I think this is funny, that when we survey, 68% of firms say that delivering personalized experiences is going to be the #1 key, right? They're really focused on it. They show that conversion rates, average order revenue, customer engagement, lifetime value, all are driven by personalization, but yet 46% of brands say they're actually going to increase budget to drive personalization. So they all know it works. It's all a topic that they need to focus on, and yet they're not putting dollars towards it. And this happened for a project we worked with on one of the large money center banks. They said, we worked 8 months on a personalization project. What is the technologies to drive this personalization? And at the end, the CEO said, this is great. I think maybe 2020. This year, we need to drive more credit cards. But that drives, to do this, we're going to need to really focus on data integration again and this personalization. The omni-channel personalization is key. So not having a personalization on site versus the mobile app. And personalization means a lot to companies. Domino's realized that personalization wasn't about personalized content, because what is their content? It's pizza. They said personalization to you is how you're going to order. And what their focus on personalization was going to be is to be an online ordering in any place you would want. And that's a personalized experience for you, which has driven their sales. If you've watched Domino's, they've actually moved from roughly about $6 a share to trading at over $200 a share, and a multiple of a technology multiple, because they're driving over 50% of their transactions online. Digital shopping, right? So we're seeing the digital shopping. Clearly, all you guys know that this is a major trend. I think Chris mentioned earlier, one of my favorite quotes in this space is, a couple months ago I read, the race is on between Amazon becoming Walmart or Walmart becoming Amazon, and we'll see who wins to get there, right? And that's an interesting proposition, right? That these two are somehow coming from different ways, but they're going to meet in the middle, because we still need to have online presence. Everybody wants a touch and feel, even though there's a digital. And I think one interesting experience, or experiment that we're seeing is, who's familiar with the Nordstrom concept store that they're launching in, right? So this idea of a 3,000-foot store that is a neighborhood hub that will have one size of each thing they offer. You can see it and touch it, and then you order. I use a company called Proper Cloth, right? So I can take a picture of myself. They fit the shirts, they send them to me. Or I can go into the store located in Soho here, and they'll actually do the sizing, but I can't transact with them. They actually bring the MacBook to me, turn the MacBook, and I transact online. So it's a store within an online experience. Programmatic. We'll go quick, because this isn't really all that emerging, but one of my favorite things on this slide is that 80% of media now is bought programmatically, representing over $30 billion in programmatic spend, but yet $16 billion in fraud. So nearly over half of the dollars being spent, or nearly half the dollars spent in programmatic, is being spent on fraud. And until that's fixed, we're seeing a significant shift back to performance media, because we can't testify that the media is working. Which will get into attribution in a minute. All right, but this is a continuous evaluation. People are looking, because they don't see the transparency, they think insourcing's the solution. Right? I could just bring it in-house. But the reality is, it's not the execution arm that's doing it. It's really the fraud, and the focus and the win will be when the technology and the agencies can figure out the fraud. The insourcing is not going to solve the problem. And what you need to do is focus on partner accountability, right? This is key. And I think that we are seeing that this is moving. We're seeing it's clearly moving away from the long tail. I was just with the client last week, and they said, we don't care where our ad shows, just as long as it shows and you see it. And we're seeing that's not the case, right? You need to focus on more true transparency, and you want that viewability, so we're not seeing the long tail anymore. And then, again, my focus group of one, if you don't think that people are moving to connected TVs, my father at the age of 80 had cut the cord from cable. And when that happened, I was like, it's all over. Right? Like now, when he called and said, I got rid of Cablevision or Comcast, I'm done. I'm like, I haven't even cut the cable cord yet, right? But the interesting thing is, as you move to that move, what people aren't realizing is that the spot changes significantly now, right? We used to talk about 60 seconds, then we talked about 13s, then we talked about 15s. Now we're talking about 7. If you're not personalized and it's not engaging, there's no way a 7-second spot wins the day for you. Identity graphs. So identity graphs and onboarding are kind of a key touch point, right? So I think last year we saw onboarding, the live ramps of the world, Throttles, New Stars, represent about $360 million in revenue. They're going to cross about $575 million in revenue this year. And we're seeing the identity graph side be almost the same. So we're seeing identity graph and onboarding to be about $1 billion industry in 2018. You know, and then what they're doing is these identity graphs and the MSPs, the technology, are driving cookie consortiums to kind of combat the walled garden, right? So now MediaMath, LiveRamp, Axiom are all working together. So how can we actually pool all our resources together so that we combat the walled gardens, so that we have experiences outside the walled gardens? And most of the leading data companies, so from the old school, the Axioms, the Experians, have focused heavily on this identity graph problem, because we can't do any of what we're talking about without identity graph. Analytics and measurement. So I've been giving an Outlooks presentation for 3 years, and attribution, it's been the year of attribution for 3 years. And yet we haven't solved attribution. And the reason being is the last slide, identity graphs, right? We have clients that talk about attribution and they say, I'm not gonna use an attribution model anymore because I look at it and I know it's not right. It directionally doesn't make sense, so I'm gonna do right or last click or first click until somebody figures this out. And it's because of the cross-device issue. But people are making a lot of inroads. Google's making inroads. The identity graphs are working really well to kind of give that full scale of when somebody starts their viewing on a mobile device and goes online, or actually when they go in store. And I just read a really interesting exercise on this, that REI has proven that out of home works for them now. Right? They've been testing it, and they're doing attribution and using LiveRamp and technology partners to show viewability to the outdoor and conversion to the in-store. So they've taken it and said, all right, what is offline driving our in-store, and how can we tie all of this attribution and data back to those individuals? So we're seeing a lot of progress in here, but the other issue is, in data scientists, we're about underemployed by 300,000 data scientists in the US. I think there's just shy of 150,000 jobs open on LinkedIn right now around this area. And until the technologies make it really easy, it's difficult to get this solved without a partner. And I'm not pushing partners. It's hard to bring these resources internally unless you are the Amazons of the world. So building in-house teams are hard. I did it. I started Circuit City. Rest our soul. But we built this team internally. That didn't work very well. But it's shifting. This is, again, shifting to performance, because I can track performance, I measure it, and I trust it, versus the abstract. But that's leaving a lot of money on the table and a lot of the effectiveness off of what can actually drive sales. My favorite slide, right? You would think that investing in ad tech and martech would slow down. But in 2011, we had 150 players, and last year we had almost 5,400 players. And we're expecting a 30% rise this year. And I think they were talking about it earlier, right? This is the group, the best analogy I have from this group is, they sell you a home, and it's a 3D rendering of a beautiful home. They tell you, you're gonna walk in, and this home is gonna be perfect for you. You show up to the plot of land, and it's a blueprint, a hammer, nails, and wood. And they're like, well, I told you it'd be easy. And trying to figure out this space right now, and what plays where, what does what. Is it a single stack that Adobe can do everything, or is it point solutions? It's a really complicated market. Leading to, who here has heard the customer data platform, the CDP? This is the year of CDP buzzwords. CDPs are a data integrator that houses your offline and online data for marketers, so they don't need to use a partner, and powers omni-channel execution. That sounds like about every buzzword that you can fit into a definition into one. And what they say is, it's great, because I came from a database background where we used to say, let us build your database for you, and you can get IT out of the room. Well, that's what they're saying, like, oh, you just plug us in and it works. Well, the reality is IT's got to find the data, has to plug the data in. So IT's not out of the room. This isn't a simple solve. One thing to remember about these guys is they will tell you that they are CRM platforms, or they will call themselves first-party DMPs, which means they're a DMP just for your customer data, which anybody could be, but it's a nice fancy word. And they're coming at it from different groups, right? They are the CRM platforms, the Blue Vens, the Red Points of the world, or the Insight and Signal and Teliums, who traditionally were tag management, but realized they had all of your tag data. So it was PII, they could associate that back through onboarders, and now they have all of your data, and they can execute for you. The reality is they are not CRM, they are not DMP, they sit somewhere in the middle, so they really are kind of a mid-market tool. They're not gonna be your enterprise solution, they're not gonna be your small business solution because they're too expensive. But they are growing fast. We've seen, I think they've doubled in size in the last year, and we're seeing a lot of investment in that space. And I'm gonna go quick because I know I'm talking a lot. But AI, IoT, blockchains, yeah, they're important. 80% of people say, marketers say that AI, and I'm, again, data scientist, so 80% say that AI is gonna drive the business. I think 79% don't know what AI really means. What do you ask them? Like, what is AI? Well, what's AI? What's machine learning? What's the difference between AI? What's the difference between machine learning, right? And I think we all know it's working. I think what we say is use machine learning to automate the process, focus the human power on the real strategy. AI will be there. The issue is that there are limited resources for this. So now where we talked about the analytics and attribution, this is even more difficult. Blockchain and advertising. One of the clients I was with last week said, this is a really interesting subject. We need to solve it. I won't be there when we solve this. Right, so I think this is a long term. I think people need to have it on their roadmap, but this isn't something that you should be spending a lot of manpower on yet. It is going to solve some great things. I think we'll see it solve fraud. I think we'll see it or just general fraud. I think we'll see blockchain solve ad fraud. I think we'll see blockchain in the near future be able to, or test being able to actually pay an individual directly to see an impression. Right, microcurrency. One company, Rakuten, just actually launched their own cryptocurrency because they can get rid of currency arbitrage, right? Because a cryptocurrency has the same value in any country. So I think we're seeing test scenarios, but it's just not there yet. And then GDPR, the top. My favorite line of GDPR is 2 countries are ready for GDPR, not organizations. 2 countries are ready for GDPR this year. So Germany and Austria are the only 2 that have actually put the legislations in place to police GDPR. So if you don't think you're ready for GDPR, I would be surprised if you were. Because the ad tech space is not ready for it yet, but the MarTech space is better served for it. This is all things that are gonna be coming out over the next couple months, 3 months, because they need to. I think what we're gonna see is a delay in GDPR in policing because of the need, because there is not a solution. And that's the end of mine.
Thank you.
Right into the buzzwords of.
Right
into the buzzwords.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So, Clay, you want to kick us off with some interesting blockchain?
Sure, can do. Okay. One of the things that we've spoken about so far is just the allusion to Bitcoin in the opening session and blockchain, about how it is likely 12, 18, 24 months away. And that's something that I definitely agree with. This is not something that I think will impact your daily lives, at least for another year. But what I want to do today is to equip folks with a few of the core principles and a few of the Napster versions of what will eventually come to bear on digital marketing. Meaning, today we're seeing a lot of early versions of what will survive into the future. We may not be talking about the precise cryptocurrencies or blockchain integrations that we talk about today, but one of the things we want to achieve is to talk a little bit beyond the fear of Bitcoin being for scammers and blockchain being just a buzzword. We want to equip you with a few core concepts. So if all else, when you think about blockchain, first pause thinking about Bitcoin for a moment, because Bitcoin is just one version of what you can do with the blockchain. What is blockchain at its core? 2 words, distributed ledger. I'm going to give a lot of different analogies for what that means, but the idea of a blockchain is that we have a system, a lot of networked computers. I've got a big setup in my garage mining away, a big network of computers worldwide that verifies transactions that are submitted to that network. Once those things are verified, they're added to a larger block of transactions, a big math formula that's added to an immutable chain of transactions. So 3 concepts here, well, 3 words, distributed ledger and immutable. So what that simply means is that imagine that we are used to working in a world with Excel spreadsheets. And formerly, we would pass that Excel spreadsheet amongst ourselves within the office. We would each make an update one by one. And quite honestly, the track and review element didn't work that well because some people would turn it off, some people wouldn't pay attention to it. Well, distributed ledgers and blockchains are a lot more like Google Sheets. And they do it even one better. Number one, multiple users can edit or add to this transaction. And by being distributed, there's no central user that can control or corrupt that data source. So what this essentially means is it's kind of counterintuitive. It means that by having millions of owners and a lot of different inputs into that chain, into that blockchain, we're able to avoid the problems of central ownership and hacking. This is really important. It was kind of an aha moment for me that for us in the West, that isn't such a big deal because we fundamentally trust that Bank of America and Wells Fargo are honest. But you think in emerging economies where there's really no guarantee that the companies that are handling your dollars, that the companies that are writing down a ledger of who owns what, you don't have that fundamental level of trust. Well, in this case, a blockchain provides a way that is a community-maintained ledger of what happened first, who traded what to whom. Another way to put it, and this is how, let's say, Bitcoin enters in, and we'll talk about a few examples of blockchain integrations like Bitcoin, but imagine that the blockchain and specific cryptocurrency was a series of transparent safes. Everybody could see what's in each one of those safes. Anybody and everybody can deposit into that safe, but only you own the combination to that safe. And they're constantly reconciling and trading information between them. So I've tried to use a couple examples. Distributed ledger, kind of like the Google Sheets on steroids. The example of cryptocurrency, the core idea is that we've got transparency in who owns what, but yet there's a private key to be able to unlock that safe. So those are a few of the principles upon which companies are building solutions. And this is really where it gets interesting because that ledger can record anything from financial transactions to healthcare records to who owns what content. And those are the things that I'd like to look at with you in a few examples of specifically what blockchain could do for your daily lives. So there are, I think, around 4,000 cryptocurrencies or blockchain integrations that are popular enough to be spoken about on CoinMarketCap, which is, if you're really interested in being overwhelmed, go to coinmarketcap.com and you will see everything that's competing in the space. But generally, they're just like a stock portfolio. They each take their own piece, their own subject matter, their own category, and they seek to address their problems, their challenges with blockchain. So I've given the example of healthcare industry. We think about big data. How can you make sure that a client's or a patient's records are continuous, that they're universally shared no matter what hospital they go to and in what order and at what time in their lives? Well, blockchain is a way that you can record in a linear fashion and in a distributed ledger the maintenance of a client's records. Just the same, we've got things such as the ability to track financial transactions, trading of potentially stocks and bonds, credit records. All of these things are, instead of the experience scenarios of the world, all of these things are ways that we can use the distributed ledger to ensure, again, kind of counterintuitively, that they're much more secure by being everywhere and being the result of consensus rather than singular ownership and single point of failure. So let's give a few examples, and a few of the things that we're going to look at are microtransactions, helping prevent fraud in advertising. Let's give a few examples of words or phrases that you may hear come up. Number one, we've all heard about Bitcoin, and essentially it is for lack of a better way of thinking about it, a replacement for dollars. I think that one of the technologies that will survive in this space, even if Bitcoin does not, is a technology called Ripple. It is not technically blockchain. It is a banker's blockchain. It is a centralized, decentralized network that not everybody trusts. But what it is it's a network where you can convert fiat currency, dollars, into virtual currency, Ripple, and transact that instantaneously without a bank sitting in the middle, without having to wait for cross-border verification, etc. I know that at least one of our clients in the financial sector is testing with Ripple right now. So once again, we think about, sure, there's Bitcoin, which is virtual dollars, but more important to that is the idea of blockchain serving as that virtual, immutable record of the transaction of whatever currency crosses its path. Two other ideas, and again, I don't think either one of these will survive the long term, but two ideas. The Brave browser. It is a browser that seeks to establish a more equitable transfer of publisher, advertiser, and consumer value, meaning it looks to have everyone agree that when I'm a consumer and I consume advertising, I am going to then spawn the issuance of tokens from the publisher to the, advertiser to the publisher. I can only agree as the consumer when that transaction takes place because I've found some value, whether it's a view or an interaction. Now again, by being on the blockchain, it's far less susceptible to hacking and fraud because there's this consensus. Now again, this is probably not the version that's going to survive because it depends on using their browser and it's not quite ready for prime time yet. An even simpler example of monetization or using the blockchain for content. Imagine that if every time you went on Reddit or that you published a blog post, you got paid in virtual currency for the number of people that interacted with your content, the number of people that liked your content or reblogged or retweeted your content. That's what the Steam network is about. It's at its heart a social network, but they incentivize publishers with these Steam tokens that are in effect the currency of that network. Two last ideas here, and again, just want to give some feel for how the content world can be touched. Two concepts, Poet and Publica, and Dissent.ch is another version of Publica, but these ideas are that one of the things, and I'll go over by just a couple seconds, if we remember way back when Google decided that HTTPS was so important, it wasn't that they only insisted upon that being for secured pages that had personally identifiable information. It was that they wanted to make sure that you knew who was publishing your content was who you thought they were. This was amidst some NSA scandals, etc. So that chain of ownership is one of the things that HTTPS seeks to achieve. What Poet and Publica seek to do is put a mark in that distributed ledger that says, I published this piece of content, it has the following rights, and I now can control who reprints this piece of content, and even who potentially even crowdfunded me to author it. So this is one of the ways this concept will absolutely survive, and we'll see this integrated into the publishing and digital space. The idea of content ownership and distribution rights controlled by the publisher because they have that singular key to that transparent safe. The safe just happens to contain their content instead of dollars or cryptocurrency. Final idea, there's also a move to do this for personally identifiable information. Imagine if instead of having 50 profiles on Facebook, Google+, etc., you had one profile you had the keys to, and you chose who to share that with. And only if they had that private key that you owned could they then have your information. That then puts the control back in your pocket. It's less hackable, as we've talked about, by being kind of everywhere. And as I say, it's then much more shareable and ultimately data mineable. Are we saying that that's a good thing with this? That's still to be seen. But again, that's essentially the goal for today. And my last phrase is that blockchain is a distributed ledger that seemingly counterintuitively, by being everywhere and being a consensus mechanism, is able to be much more secure, much more unchangeable, and ultimately will be the focus of fraud prevention, trend spotting, big data analysis.
Thank you, Clay.
Thank you.
Michael? Michael number 2.
There you go. You got it.
All right. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. All right, so I want to talk about narrow targeting with third-party data. So in 2017, third-party data offerings, or the sale of third-party data, its utilization, exceeded $10 billion in utilization. And that's not even considering the dollars that were spent on activation against those audiences, on MarTech like DMP, et cetera. Third-party data, you know, what is it? It's aggregated information provided usually by, you know, Axiom, Epsilon, but also from, you know, Google and Facebook. It's the interests that users have, customers have, right? Now that $10 billion in 2017 broke out along, you know, omni-channel data sets, so also transactional data sets, the purchase behavior that consumers had in market, digital behaviors. So if you're shopping on a car site and now your information could be resold to, you know, Ford and Fiat as they look to target consumers who are in market. Specialty. So specialty, there's a lot of really advanced use of third-party data segmentation being resold. For example, the combination of you know, data from your smartphone, like you know, your geolocation, geofensible data, together with event-based data. So you know, it being a very strong signal of your interest, not just the places you go, but also the time that you're there. I've even seen utilization there where it's specific, you know, religious organizations by the house of worship that they're at on a given Sunday. So some of the top trends in third-party data is they're becoming more signal-based, less demographic-based. So the ability to target audiences based on those retail buying behaviors, the programmatic television that they're consuming, travel patterns, et cetera, is becoming more broadly capable and broadly distributed. There are increasingly more data providers contributing, and I think that's a key trend, right? There are now thousands and more coming on. This is really spurred by, Michael, what you were talking about earlier with the connected ID graphs, because there is now, and increasingly so, an interconnected network of, you know, or interconnected capability for these data providers and even brands to be sharing those audiences in a hashed, compliant way. And so with that also, there's greater standardization in terms of permissions and privacy management, right? So the tools that are usable to target these audiences are you know, mandated by the brands that are offering these data to be much more strict in terms of you know, the access, you know, usage rights, as well as pricing and policy. And so with that, there are more options, that we agencies on behalf of our clients can use to build third-party data targets. Now, some of this has been around for a while in terms of, why is this new emerging tech? It's really because of some of the advancements of how we can really combine these characteristics upon each other, not just demographic characteristics, but also propensities, and of course, geographies, but not just, states, but also, and not just zip codes, but, census tract information, tax deed information, an incredible variety. And this starts to engender millions of different targetable segments, right? And those, propensities are very interesting because they, give us, pre-built audiences who may even have a specific brand preference, which can be really interesting if we're looking to conquest audiences. So what I thought I'd like to do today, because I could give you stats on how many millions of loads of third-party data segments there are out there that we can target. Well, when I go through these and I help create audience segments for clients, I'm often struck by honestly how bizarre some of these segments are that are out there. And I felt that it would probably best illustrate how many there are if we touch on some of the unusual natures of that. So in the agency world, we're often contacted by, old colleagues or, old friends, and they ask us, hey, on the weekend or at nighttime when you're not doing something, could you help me out? And in this case, create an audience for me. So my old friend Bill Lundberg, he and I, we used to work together at the same tech company back in the 90s. So he's over at Mailboxes Direct. So interesting thing about Mailboxes Direct, they sell mailboxes directly. And Bill, he really needed to sell more units. They got a lot of new varieties of product coming in, and they had to make some room for more boxes. And one of his best performing segments traditionally had been new home users, new home owners, rather, people who are switching their location. So this is about a year ago when he first reached out. He says, can you help me define an audience that we can reach there? So looking at some Boolean logic combinations there, a new mover segment, together with homeowner type residential mail site, and that's not apartment buildings, but people who have single unit homes that they receive mail to, right? Well, I got counts back, 2.4 million on Facebook, and Google DBM, I can push out 575,000. And I can even hit these guys in programmatic TV at Roku with 268,000. And that worked well for him. I shipped that audience off. He can use that to push to any programmatic partner that he wants. But he came back about 6 months later and he says, well, you know what, we're under a lot of competition from Amazon, so we've had to get more niche with our products. So now they've rebranded as artisanal mailboxes, and he wanted to know, well, who could we push these more crafty mailboxes to? So that was kind of a stumper. So I went back to the well. And I figured, well, these are more higher income targets here, so let's eliminate the lower income targets. That makes sense. And I was able also to pick audiences who their home exterior was made from wood frame, wood shingle, board and batten, brick wood, and cedar, figuring that nobody with an aluminum siding house is going to want that mailbox. That brought that down about 90%, 296,000 on Facebook, now 72,000 on Google DBM. The Facebook audiences are always a bit higher, but it might be due to the Russian accounts. I'm not quite sure. So 3 months later, he comes back. That Amazon competition is still accelerating. So now they're going only after the novelty segment, big fish mailboxes. And he wanted me to help him again. I said, Bill, I actually have real clients who pay me. But now I was just intrigued. So I said, okay, well, I took it as a challenge. All right, what could we do there? All right, well, obviously I scratched out the home exterior options, and I went back. I found the top 5 demi-deciles for fishing, hunting magazines, or owns a boat. Had also recently purchased fishing products, and that brought us down to 221,000 on Facebook. And, just in case he wants to test a more specific audience, I also found those who had a propensity for ordering and receiving prescriptions by mail. I figured there's some hot, top performers and pharmaceutical users there. All right, so I have about 30 of these. We got time for that, Kate? No, just one more. We'll do just one more, okay. All right, so this is the a friend of mine, Haruya. I think we met in college. He reached out to me. He's got an Airbnb listing in Aoshima Island in Japan. And it's a holiday home, and he wants to practice his English, so he's having more American tourists. He wants more American tourists to book the place. I said, that's great. That's great. Well, tell me about the place. Well, it's a camper van, and it rents out for about $39 a night. Okay. Well, that was tricky. So I said, well, tell me more about Aoshima Island. And that's where things got more interesting. It's also known as Cat Island, where the cat populations is about 100 to 1 versus people. And I said, okay. It listed number 50 of 50 weird yet fascinating places all across the world. I said, well, now I have something to work with. So I started to build some segments here. So first, of course, we want to go after the travel segment, right? I found the Amex Advance lists of people who are have a high propensity to be taking an international trip. Also have frequent flyer accounts. Also, travel for vacation and leisure. I didn't bother giving him the counts there because he's trying to move a $39 a night property, and we probably need to narrow the audience a little bit more. Then I layered that on with the cat person segments. So the people who had bought pet food and flea control products at a grocery store or supermarket for the last 6 months. And I was able even to also further double confirm that with folks who had bought specifically the brands Cat's Pride, Whisker Lickens, Meow Mix, or Purina One. Okay, which is good, but again, he really needs a very targeted audience because he has about $20 worth of ad spend. So, challenged again. Okay, so I also was able to layer on there where vacation travel by RV is a passion for those customers. And they also dress their pets in Halloween costumes. It's a real actual segment. You can't see the numbers, but I actually was able to drill that down to 289 people on AppNexus. Facebook wouldn't even let me target that closely anymore. They're just like, you're done. Google DBM at 670 and to Mogul at 633 in case he also wants to get into programmatic. And that's really all I wanted to do today, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So we've got about 2 minutes. So are there any questions for any of these guys? So I have a question for all three of you that I wanted to kick over, which is out of everything that we've talked about up here today, what do you think is most relevant for the folks that are in the room today? So I will start with you, Michael.
I think clearly, I think identity graphs and identity is key, right? I think being able to match that, and people talk about it, but I think the utilization is just on the cusp of really hitting being able to do attribution and that's not just the identity graph isn't just for attribution, but it's for omni-channel marketing as well. So now you can deliver that cross-channel experience because you know who that individual is and how they navigate through their devices.
Awesome. Clay?
I'd say it's likely, number one, microtransactions, the ability as a retailer to be able to support them regardless of what the currency is behind it, and Two, it would be expecting that content rights management will likely be the biggest thing that hits direct marketers out of the blockchain space. There may be some outperformers, some things that come up and surprise us, such as maybe credit processing or credit ratings and personal information profiles, but I'd say that those two ideas, micropayments and content management.
Michael?
So, the ideal is you're fully leveraging your first-party data and to its fullest. But not every marketer has that capability, and especially with some of the EU lawyers coming after our data with GDPR. But there is a lot of capabilities that are already out there today in terms of the data sets we can go after. In a large way, the future's already here. And so what I would most encourage folks to do is to get out there and test and look for high-performing segments and audiences.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much.